In our last episode, I showed you how I colored yellow icing. In this part 3 of our 6-part Humblebee series, I color black icing, make these bees, and attempt writing on cookies again. To color the black icing today, we will need 3 things: white base icing, black gel color, and leftover black icing from the freezer. After I snip off the end of the old piping bag, I squeeze this tar-like substance into my mixing bowl. Of all of the colors I have done this with, none are as impressive as looking at this black icing. Though soon I will be switching over to the Sugar Arts Master Elite Black Powder, this icing was made with gel color. And believe it or not, it's not oversaturated. I'll tell you in a bit how I achieved this. You can see this second icing is actually a dark gray. Using this leftover icing is ideal, especially when making black. It enables you to use far less gel color than you would have had to use if you were starting with plain white icing. I'm back with my bowl of fresh icing. I'm fortunate to have these glass Pyrex bowls that have lids on them. It makes it so much easier to keep my icing from drying out. I got this set at Costco years ago. If you don't have a lid for your bowl, I have heard that putting a damp paper towel over your bowl will help keep it from crusting over. Black is actually the last color I make today, so all of my leftover base icing goes into this 8-ounce deli soup container I purchased on Amazon. Then it goes into the freezer. I use my uncolored icing from the freezer the same as if it were fresh out of my mixer. Because I have done nothing else with it, the consistency seems to hold up. In case you're curious, the container in the back with the white icing in it is a 32-ounce deli container. I anticipated I wouldn't be using all of my fresh icing today, so I already had this extra container filled. I need to see where I'm starting at with this icing, so I mix it up a bit first. I know I'm going to need more icing than I have here, so I add more fresh icing. I like to always have some leftover black icing in my freezer. 1, because very often I only need a little bit of black icing for details. And I find that because the black icing has a different feel to it and it behaves a little different than other colors, I can use the soft peak icing straight out of the freezer without having to rebag it. And 2, because it is so much easier to color starting with a base of dark icing rather than white. I talk a little bit more about the interesting texture of the black icing in part 2, making bead transfers. While the key to perfect, not oversaturated black is to allow the color to develop before using it, this color is definitely nowhere near where I need it to be. The color that's in there was fully developed a long time ago, and so I seriously doubt there is any more opportunity for this icing to get darker. Though if you know something that I don't, please let me know. So I must add more gel color. The best advice I can give you to avoid oversaturating your icing with gel color is to color the icing a few shades lighter than what you want it to be when you eat your cookie. As it is often said in the cookie community, if your icing is the color you want it in the mixing bowl, you've gone too far. The icing needs time to develop. The darker the icing, the longer it needs. So you will find that there are 2 stages of color change. 1 in the time between when you make your icing and when you decorate your cookies, and again once the icing completely dries. No idea why these things happen, but they do. If you have the time, I would recommend always giving yourself at least 2 days to allow black to develop. In my case, this icing will sit in the freezer for a week. Bee decorating time. I've got my edible ink marker here to help me know where it is I need to place my icing. It may not be necessary for you to do this, but without this step, I am lost. I purchased a pack of 3 of these on Amazon. They're cheapy ones, but they get the job done. This one has suffered a little because the butter in the cookie wreaks havoc on the tip. I only need a very light line to see where I'm going, so this works. The key when marking up your cookie is to stay away from the edges or anywhere you won't have icing to cover up the marker. You can see here where I didn't quite make it. I remembered to stay away from the edges, but not where else I would have no icing to cover. Lesson learned. I have chosen to once again use a 1 consistency outline and flood for this bee. Though stay tuned because in a future episode, I attempt a 2 consistency outline and flood, and you will see why I stick with 1 consistency. This appears to be a thin flood. I say that because as I apply it, the icing starts to settle out on its own. I don't really have to do much with the scribe other than moving the icing to the areas I want it and maybe pop some air bubbles. For many of the cookies I make in this series, I use the flooding in sections technique. This just means that it takes 15 times as long to decorate the cookie than if I had just placed all of the icing next to each other while wet. Half kidding. I could have done it that way. That technique is what we call wet on wet, or really more like wet next to wet. But I think the impact of flooding in sections is more impressive because it leaves a really neat looking seam between the sections. And I would say it kind of has a more upgraded feel, as it should, because it does take 15 times as long. It takes so long because, let's say for example with this bee cookie, instead of taking 3 to 5 minutes to flood all of the sections of the cookie in one shot, I have to flood 2 sections in yellow, transfer it to my dehydrator for 15 minutes to allow the icing to crust over, take it out, flood 2 sections in black, then back in the dehydrator for another 15. Flood the white, 3rd time in the dehydrator for another 15, and then finally we get to finish the details and, you guessed it, back in the dehydrator for another 15. Add all that up. Over an hour, start to finish. That is pretty close to 15 times as long. And if you don't have a dehydrator and instead place the cookie in front of a table fan, double that time. So when someone orders cookies and you have flooded in sections, please, please, please charge them accordingly. Though in total I decorate 10 bees for this series, I'm only showing you bee number 1. So that explains why I had to bust out my edible marker for a second time on this cookie. I completely failed to mark out all of the sections I needed to make this bee. I am so happy with this black. Taking the time to appropriately let the black develop over several days, in my opinion, is totally worth the wait, or worth the planning, whichever approach you take. When doing this flooding in sections technique, there are a couple of ways to get that beautiful seam. One is to lay down a line of icing first and then flood in as you normally would. I prefer to flood a large amount of icing up next to the crusted over section instead. The key here is not to get your scribe anywhere near that seam once you've flooded up next to it. If you must get more icing to the seam area, I find that placing the tip of your scribe in the flood icing a bit away from the seam and then using the icing to push toward the seam doesn't ruin that perfect seam look. A benefit to flooding in sections that I forgot to mention is that it helps with color bleed. So in this case, I run the risk of black bleeding over into my yellow and white sections. But since the yellow has already started to crust over, it reduces the risk of the black wandering its way over and ruining the stark look of the yellow against the black. Also, the quicker the icing crusts, the less time there is for color bleed to happen. A benefit to having a dehydrator. Since I'm showing you this bee in real time, you can see just how long it takes to ice these cookies. And since I took out most of the parts where I switch bags, grab my scribe, wipe off my tips, and move the cookie in and out of the dehydrator, it actually takes a bit longer than even what you see here. I don't mind though. I pop in my AirPods. And since my Daft Punk playlist is over 8 hours long, I've got some amazing robot music for a good long while. Anyone else a fan? If you are, let me know your favorite song or songs. It's so hard to choose a favorite. Sorry, off topic, I know. Now, back to this bee. I only made 2 consistencies of icing for this series, so all of my details like the antenna, any outlining or writing you see, and even some of the honey coming up has been done with soft peak piping. I don't show the making of my white icing in this series, but I do actually color my white icing with white. I don't color the whole batch with white though, only the stuff going into my piping bags. If you haven't heard of this before, I'll tell you why I switched to doing this, because at first I didn't. Since the icing comes out of my mixer pretty white already, I don't really see a huge difference in the color itself. Maybe a little if I'm specifically looking to compare, but I don't think the average non-decorator eye would see much of a difference. Mostly, I add white gel color to my icing to help with color bleed. The theory goes that if you use white icing that has not had any gel color added to it, the properties of the icings are different, and basically, the highly colored icing overpowers the base icing. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's left vulnerable to color bleed. I don't want color bleed, so I add white gel. I'm going to share with you something that is no secret. Outlining circles is not easy. I don't exactly know why this is, but no matter how hard I try to stabilize my hands, lift up my bag, look ahead of the line I'm piping, and slow down my speed, they always come out just a little bit wonky. It literally took me 35 seconds to outline this circle, and it too is a bit wonky. I just had to go back and check my footage because it appears that I used soft peak to outline this cookie. I think I was attempting to give myself my best shot at not having icing spill over the edge, which, if I recall correctly, I've had more trouble with spillover with circles than any other shape. This is the part where I have a tendency to hold my breath, especially with circles. I am trying to get my flood icing as close to and almost on top of that outline because I really don't want to have to see that outline if I can help it. I am not a fan at all of seeing the outline, and this is the entire reason I usually stick to a one consistency outline and flood where they both melt together. Of course, this is totally a personal preference. Many people don't mind seeing the outline, but for some strange reason, I do. Now, if you have seen any of my other videos where I have attempted to write on cookies, you will know it's not been amazing. And while I still have not really worked on this, I am, once again, going to attempt to write on cookies in this series. Nothing spectacular, just a simple, basic printing. I am, however, trying harder than I ever have in the past. I am actually paying attention to the size and spacing consistency of my letters and the placement of my letters and my words. And probably the biggest adjustment that I'm making is slowing down. As if that were even possible. This set took me hours. I just checked. These 2 words took me 7 minutes. It's not an exciting watch in real time, so I'm gonna speed this one up for you. My cookies spent the night in my unplugged dehydrator with the door ajar, and I'm confident my cookies are dry enough to add the finishing touches. I've again busted out my edible marker to write on the top of the icing. It's important that you wait until your cookie is fairly dry before poking at it with a marker. So shooting these videos can be frustrating at times, but can yield a lesson. Here's an example. In the past, we have put a cookie down on my decorating surface prior to hitting the autofocus button on the iPhone. Today, cameraman, yeah, I'm gonna blame him this time. Usually, I'm the one in the hot seat, not today. Where was I? Oh yes, cameraman hit the autofocus and said, "It'll be fine." It's not fine. And sadly, every video in this series will have a bit of this problem. Luckily though, we do have a decent side shot, so most of this will be shown from the side. I actually did 2 of these circle cookies. On the first one, I used my black soft peak piping consistency to make the little bee movement marks. I wasn't overjoyed about how it looked, so I switched to the marker. I was really apprehensive when laying down my first marks on the cookie. I was afraid the marks would come out too chunky. And because of this, I had to go over them a second time because they weren't dark enough. Now I get to use the bee transfers I made 4 days ago. I used my soft peak to glue the bee on. My hand is in the way, but here I'm drawing on the antennae. Overall, I'm okay with the writing on this cookie. But after adding the finishing touches, the writing becomes less of a focal point and it looks much better. Though I am very, very, very happy with the way the bees turned out and all of the rest of the cookies in this series. See you next time for hexagons.
Next time on Kuny's Cookie Chronicles.
So far in this series, we have colored icing, made transfers, and iced bee cookies. In this part 4 of our 6-part Humble Bee series, piping honey and stenciling honeycomb for the first time are on our agenda.